Hello, everyone. My name is Caroline Covarrubias, and today I will be presenting on a guide on how to make your nonprofit work, an in-depth guide on starting a nonprofit organization. So going over a little bit about what we're going to discuss today, we're going to go over a variety of topics. We're going to first dive into our ABCDs, and no, not the ones you learned in kindergarten. We're going to talk a little bit about mapping communities and identifying the assets that already exist within the communities. After that, we're going to go ahead and dive into social capital. What is social capital? We're going to go over the assets of the community and how to utilize them to create some trust. After that, we're going to go ahead and establish some SMART goals for ourselves. So we're going to go ahead and talk about setting up benchmark goals and long-term goals for your nonprofit organization and how you should go about that. Then we're going to dive deep into everybody's favorite topic. We're going to talk about finances. So we're going to talk about different types of taxes that you need to file as a nonprofit organization, different types of grants that you are able to have as a nonprofit organization, and some fundraising efforts that you can definitely participate and implement within your nonprofit organization. After that, we're going to go ahead and wrap everything up by reviewing SMART goals and reflecting on honesty and what the power of reflecting can do for your organization. But before we dive into any of that, we're going to go ahead and talk about exactly who am I and what makes me a credible source for this information. So since 2013, I have been a Rotary International participant. I have participated in several other sectors of their nonprofit organizations, such as Interact Community Service Club, which I served as president of from 2018 to 2019. I also at the end of my high school career, received a Rotary International Service Learning Scholarship in 2019. And then after that, I kind of continued the momentum with community service at DePaul University as I became a community service scholarship recipient in 2020, my sophomore year. From there, I joined the community service cohort from 2020 to expected graduation, which will be 2023. And then in that same breath, I will also be graduating with a community service minor in June of 2023. So that's just a little bit about me. I'm very passionate about community service. Throughout my time at DePaul, I have been able to complete over 250 hours of service learning, which is really important to me. And yeah, I just wanted to share a couple of these nuggets of knowledge that I was given the privilege of learning throughout my time at DePaul and through my service learning experience. So I hope you guys can find whatever I have to say useful. I am by no means an expert, but just a resource to you. So first off, let's talk about our ABCD model and mapping your community. I like to think of this as the first most vital steps. So what is the ABCD model? So the model was co-founded by John L. McKnight, who was the former director of community service studies at Northwestern University, and John P. Kritzman, who was a faculty member in the social policy and education program at Northwestern University. And they created the ABCD model to kind of act as a new way of approaching developing nonprofit organizations in a community. So the model is most commonly identified as key building blocks for sustainable community revitalization efforts. A couple of tongue twisters there, sorry about that. And the model also allows the residents of the communities to be the experts on what they need, which is why so many people love this model when creating nonprofit organizations. It gives the dignity back to the people. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean when I say the experts are the community residents? Well, the ABCD model allows community residents to be the experts on what they need and vocalize what they need rather than you providing a resource that you believe they need. So the biggest failure in nonprofit organizations often comes from the lack of identifying what the community needs when implementing a nonprofit with the ABCD model. You should be asking yourself a couple of key questions in order to kind of prevent from that failure. And those questions include, does my organization's efforts exist elsewhere in the community? If so, can I collaborate? So a lot of times what happens is there is an influx of these amazing ideas and resources, but there's not enough access to actually make these maintainable. So when another nonprofit organization comes into the picture with the same idea, all that it does is kind of influx and create less maintainable goals for those organizations. And there's just not any reliable resources coming out of those organizations to the people. So it's really contradictory of what you're trying to do. So we always suggest not to do that. Kind of go outside of your bubble and kind of identify what exactly is missing. And that comes with identifying what exists as well. So after that, you're going to go ahead and ask yourself, how am I involving the community in the creation of this organization? So are you having one-on-one meetings with members of the community? Are you actually taking into account their voice, or are you identifying for them what they need? So this is a really big reflector that you constantly do have to be asking yourself when creating your nonprofit organization. I like to think of it as one of those questions that kind of centers you back to your main purpose of that project. So if you want to put a post-it note up somewhere while you're working that says that, make it your verbatim. A lot of times the easiest way to kind of do this is to make the executive board made up completely of the community. I understand this cannot be completely realistic for up and coming nonprofit organizations who might need extra help from outside sources that might not be people from the community. And that's okay, as long as your intention at the end of the day is to leave the organization within the hands of the people. So next, we're going to talk about mapping with the ABCD model. So mapping is incredibly important. I actually took this little snippet out from the John L. McKnight and John Kreutzmann kind of guide on the ABCD model, which reads, the appeal of ABCD lies in the promises that communities can drive the development process themselves by identifying and mobilizing existing but often unrecognized assets, and thereby responding to and creating local economic opportunity. So when in the process of mapping out your community, it's important that you spend time physically within it. So if this means going in and spending an entire day and kind of just walking around, seeing how far transportation is to local grocery stores, how far transportation is from school buildings, local institutions, you really want to identify that. And when you identify that, it'll help you kind of zone in on like what the community is needing, whether that might be transportation or if it's a food desert. The options are kind of endless, unfortunately, of what that might be. So getting into the community is always a big help when determining that. So next, you're going to really want to map this out like on pen and paper. I know that that's something unheard of now, but you definitely do want to do that. I think it really helps the process to have like a physical, tangible map and kind of visualize exactly what you're kind of trying to zone in on. So when you start mapping, you're going to first want to work in from gifts of individuals, work out to citizens associations and local institutions. So you can pause here and kind of read a little bit more about what that might be. So for example, a local institution would be identified as a school, college, university. Citizens associations might be identified as any churches that exist within the area. And gifts of individuals is kind of specific to who is making up the community, who are the members of that community, what are some strong talents or skills that are easily identified in that community. So here, this example is in a square. And I always say it doesn't have to be in a square, it could be in a circle, it could be in a triangle, whatever works for you, just as long as it is on pen and paper and you are able to kind of really map it out and kind of go through and figure out what that community needs. Once you have this map, it is going to be very easy to think about what this community doesn't have and what it does that you can accentuate through your nonprofit organization. A really strong tool that I can suggest when making this map is to also make one of your own community if you're a visitor mapping out somebody else's community and kind of comparing and contrasting what's missing, what this community has that this other community doesn't have, if that's an asset or if it's not. I think that really helps, but every case is very different, whatever works for you. As long as you're using this map, there's really nothing that can deter you away from not looking at the issues of that community throughout an asset-based lens. So next, we're going to talk about social capital and why it's important. The next step is all about gaining trust. So what exactly is social capital? So social capital is the trust that is needed, essentially. Before determining any of your goals of operations for your organization, you must first work on social capital within the community, especially if you're an outside visitor to the community. Social capital is how organizations receive participations from community members. Think about it this way. If you are not an active participant of the community, how do you expect them to show up and trust you when your nonprofit is established? Building a sense of trust between you and the community is not just necessary, but vital in your success and longevity of your nonprofit. Who are you connecting with and who is on your executive board should always be constant questions that you are asking yourself when you feel like you might be in a rut with regards to directions. Always kind of come back to this and meditate on it and think about how you can better yourself and your organization moving forward with this in mind. So what are some easy ways to implement social capital? So here are a couple easy ways. You can attend neighborhood meetings and town halls and really understand the politics of that community and kind of what's going on. You can also volunteer and network with existing organizations. So remember earlier I asked you, could you collaborate with already existing organizations? This is a great way to go ahead and go forth and do that and kind of familiar yourself with some of the other organizations that are already active within that community and the assets that they bring to the table. And you can ask yourself how you can accentuate those with your nonprofit or bring something completely different to the table. After that, I would definitely suggest participating in one-on-one interviews. It can be informational, it can be interpersonal, whatever works for you, but make sure you're actually actively going in and having conversations with the people of the community and constantly asking themselves what they need and allowing them the opportunity and the voice to be the experts of that. And lastly, realize sometimes your role is to listen. Maybe sometimes you want to give a little bit too much opinion on a one-on-one interview. Kind of reel it in and think about it as this isn't always about you. Sometimes you just have to listen. Sometimes people tell you things and there is no response that is needed. I think this is something I had a lot of trouble learning at first because I feel very opinionated about a lot of things. But truly, there is a time and a place for everybody's opinion, but sometimes people just need to be listened to. Next, we're going to talk about some SMART goals. So stay smart with some SMART goals. What is a SMART goal? A SMART goal is a goal that you can set for yourself that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And what I mean by that is specifically, what are you trying to accomplish? Who are you involved with? When will this occur? So this is kind of going to be your who, what, when, why. After that, once you gotten that determined, you're going to go ahead and ask yourself how you're going to measure the success of your organization. Will success be having at least 20 volunteers one day? Will it be being able to provide a certain amount of funding through a grant? Go ahead and really list that out and be specific when talking about how you're going to measure it. Next, talk about how you're going to attain your goal. Do you have access to the resources needed? Are you being realistic with your timeline? Are there any outside challenges that might affect you achieving your goals on that timeline? This is the time to be honest with yourself. It's great to have all of these goals that are over the moon, but when you're first starting off and you're setting those foundations for success, you really want to be realistic. There will be a time and a place for everybody's success, but be realistic when you first start off. Next, we're going to talk about your goals being relevant. Are your objectives aligned with your community's needs and assets? So I'd say when you are making your SMART goals to take out that pen and paper with your map on it and go ahead and post that right in front of you and leave that as a reminder to you of what is needed within that community. Once you've gone ahead and ticked off all of those on your checklist, you're going to go ahead and set a timeline for yourself. I highly suggest setting timeline benchmarks for your team to meet just because I think it really boosts morale, kind of realizing those small battles that you win. This can be known as a very thankless job, but it doesn't have to be. As long as you're celebrating the small wins that you have within your organization, you are more than likely going to keep morale going, which is really the heart of any nonprofit organization. Alrighty, so let's talk about the fun stuff. So let's talk about grants, fundraising, and taxes. So, ooh, I got a little pop-up on there. Let's talk about some taxes, fundraising, and grants. So I got this fun little infographic off of the Getting Attention website. I think they're an excellent resource if you want to learn more about grants and how to file them for nonprofits. I mainly just want to talk about two that I see the most, and that is going to be corporate grants and restricted funds. So a lot of times corporate grants will get a lot of flack in this industry just because people have their opinions on it, because corporate grants are funded by corporate companies that want to use some of its money to support philanthropic causes. So what this means is that the company usually sets aside a certain budget for philanthropy so they can write it off for their taxes. Personally, I've had many instructors at my time at DePaul, many mentors through my service learning that have all really said the same thing. It doesn't matter where the money comes from, but what you're doing with it. So sometimes it might just be a tax write-off and they might not actually care. But like I said, set your ego aside. It's not always about you. If you have access to have funding and make incredible things happen, then go right and do it. So corporate grants, in my opinion, are just another resource that you can utilize for the better of a community. So there's a lot of stuff that and research that you could do with regards to that, but that is just my personal opinion. And next, I'd like to talk about some restricted funds. So grants like these will fund a particular purpose, project, or program. This is the most common type of funding grant. So if you have an idea that you think is really powerful and can really impact a community and even go forth into impacting other communities, you're definitely going to go and want to do your research on any restricted fund grants. The thing with grants is that they do take a lot of writing. So I've known nonprofit organizations that hire interns from different universities or high school programs, and they hire those students to help them kind of do all of the writing. It is a very tedious process, but it is more than essential for your nonprofit organization to receive funding. A large portion of funding from the nonprofit organizations that I have worked with come from grants, specifically corporate grants, which is why I wanted to just address what is most commonly heard in this nonprofit realm with regards to those corporate grants. So you can pause the screen, kind of read a little bit more about those grants, or I genuinely do advise you guys to pay attention and get on the Getting Attention website and just learn a little bit more in general about that. Moving on, let's talk about our other fundraising efforts that you can have. So fundraising efforts can be unique and special to your organization's goals. This is where creativity genuinely counts. Have fun with this part and utilize any volunteers that you can coordinate for this brainstorming session. So I decided to list a couple of fundraising efforts I've been a part of. So pledge challenges are always really popular. If you're familiar with DePaul, you know that we have Demonthon. That would fall into the pledge challenges. Bake sales are always big, fundraising letters, food drives, toy drives, rummage sales, raffles. Really, the options are limitless when it comes to fundraising. It's really a fun part of nonprofit organization because it's a lot of brainstorming about what works, how many volunteers you have. So this is a lot of fun, something that is always accessible to you. It just takes some time and effort. Next, let's talk about filing some taxes. So filing your taxes is a nonprofit. So nonprofits with annual revenue of less than 20,000, 200,000 and assets valued at less than 500,000 will file the 990 easy tax form. And then nonprofits with annual revenue of 500,000 will need to file the 990 IRS form. For you just starting off with your nonprofit, the IRS form that you would need to fill out is going to be known as the file 990T, and this is what it looks like. So this is some fun stuff. A lot of nonprofits, as soon as they get any grant money or any fundraising money, they allot it to an accountant to do this. But if you're just starting off, there is a lot of fun resources on the internet. Getting Attention is one of them that can help you kind of walk through these tax forms. Another great way that I kind of learned how to fill out these tax forms was by asking other nonprofit organizations that I work for if I could kind of sit in on like what the process is or talk to the person that files their taxes. So this is going to be the form that you're mainly going to fill out. Lots of fun stuff to look forward to, but as soon as you get any budget, I do suggest hiring an accountant. That is what most nonprofit budgets go towards, is the accountant. But yeah, moving on. We're gonna finish up with reviewing your SMART goals. So you always want to review your timeline constantly. You're going to want to establish your goals. You're going to want to work towards your goals with your community, observe what's not working, and be comfortable with changing the timeline and be honest with yourself. More times than not, plans change. And that is by no means anything that should be discouraging to you, but more so something that fuels you towards success. Plans change, the world isn't perfect, but your goals and your passion will still always remain the same. And that is something you constantly need to look after. Thank you so much for sitting in on my creative project, which I went over some of the fundamentals of starting your nonprofit. By no means is this all that you have to do, but this is just a fun way to kind of start thinking and planning out your nonprofit organization. I hope you all really enjoyed this presentation. And if you'd like to use me as a further resource, you can always contact me at my DePaul email or my number that is listed on the screen. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day.